The thunderous roar of 20,000 voices echoed through Madison Square Garden on that humid August evening in 1978. But in the backstage area, an unusual silence had fallen over the legendary boxing venue. Muhammad Ali, the greatest heavyweight champion the world had ever known, stood in a dimly lit corridor, his massive frame casting long shadows against the concrete walls. Sweat still glistened on his forehead from his exhibition match just hours earlier. But his eyes held something different tonight, something that would change the course of martial arts history forever. Just 20 feet away, a young man from Hong Kong sat quietly on a metal folding chair, his slight build seeming almost comical next to the towering figures of boxers and promoters who filled the hallway. Jackie Chan was barely 24 years old, his English still heavily accented. His Hollywood dreams nothing more than whispered hopes, shared with his stunt coordinator friends, back in the cramped apartments of Kowloon. He had come to New York not as a star, but as part of a small delegation of martial artists, invited to witness Ali's exhibition match against a local contender. The air conditioning hummed overhead, mixing the scent of liniment and leather with the lingering aroma of hot dogs and beer that had drifted down from the arena above. Jackie nervously adjusted his simple white polo shirt, the same one he had worn on the 18-hour flight from Hong Kong. His only decent piece of clothing that didn't bear the stains and tears of countless stunt rehearsals. He had never imagined he would be this close to greatness, breathing the same air as the man who had captivated the world with his poetry in motion. Muhammad Ali had finished his post-fight interviews, his usual bravado and quick wit having entertained the press corps for nearly an hour. But now, as he walked through the backstage area, his attention was drawn to something unexpected. Word had traveled through the boxing community about this young Chinese performer who could move like water and strike like lightning. The stories seemed impossible. Tales of a man who could leap from building to building, who fought with a smile on his face, who turned violence into an art form that somehow managed to be both devastating and beautiful. The corridor fell silent as Ali approached Jackie's corner of the backstage area. Every conversation stopped, every movement paused, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. Jackie looked up from his hands, which he had been studying intently to avoid making eye contact with the American boxing legends, who had been staring at him with curiosity and skepticism all evening. "You're the kid from Hong Kong," Ali said, his voice carrying that familiar cadence that had become the soundtrack of an era. "The one they say moves like Bruce Lee but fights like he's dancing." Jackie stood slowly, his heart hammering against his ribcage so hard he was certain everyone in the hallway could hear it. He had studied English for years, but facing Muhammad Ali felt like every word he had ever learned had suddenly evaporated from his mind. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across Ali's face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the intensity in his eyes that had intimidated opponents across 3 decades of boxing. "Yes, sir," Jackie managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am Jackie Chan." Ali circled him slowly, the way a predator might study its prey, but there was something playful in his movements, something that suggested this was more curiosity than menace. The other fighters and trainers in the hallway formed an impromptu circle around them, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The distant sounds of the crowd filing out of the arena seemed to fade away, replaced by the electric tension of anticipation. "I've heard stories," Ali continued, his hands clasped behind his back as he completed his circle around Jackie. "Stories about a man who can take a punch and turn it into poetry. Stories about someone who fights like it's a dance, who makes violence look like art. But I've heard a lot of stories in my time, kid. Most of them turn out to be just that, stories." The challenge hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Jackie could feel the weight of every gaze in that corridor, could sense the mixture of excitement and skepticism radiating from the assembled crowd. These were men who had spent their lives studying the science of combat, who understood the brutal mathematics of force and resistance, of speed and power. To them, martial arts movies were fantasy, elaborate choreography designed to entertain rather than devastate. "Mr. Ali," Jackie said, his English becoming more confident as his nerves settled into the familiar rhythm of performance. "I have great respect for your skill. What I do, it is different from boxing. It is not about power alone." Ali's eyebrows raised slightly, a hint of amusement flickering across his features. "Different, you say? Well, I've been in this game for more years than you've been alive, son. I've seen every style, every technique, every trick in the book. But I'll tell you what, I'm curious enough to find out what makes you so special." The crowd pressed closer, forming a tighter circle around the two men. Someone had dimmed the overhead lights, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere in the concrete corridor. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, charged with the electricity that only comes when legends are about to collide. Ali removed his silk robe, revealing the powerful shoulders and arms that had delivered some of the most devastating punches in boxing history. Even at 36, even past his prime, his physique was a testament to decades of dedication and natural athletic ability. He stood nearly 6 feet 3 inches tall, his reach extending like the wings of some great bird of prey. "Here's what we're going to do," Ali announced, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded attention in the world's greatest arenas. "I want to see what this kung fu dancing is all about. I'm going to throw a punch, not a hard one. Mind you, just enough to test your reflexes. If you're half as good as they say you are, you should be able to handle it." Jackie felt his mouth go dry. This was not what he had expected when he accepted the invitation to attend the boxing match. He had come as an observer, a student hoping to learn from watching the greatest boxer of all time. Now he found himself in the center of an impromptu demonstration that could either validate everything he had worked for, or humiliate him in front of some of the most respected fighters in America. "I understand," Jackie replied, settling into a stance that looked deceptively casual to the untrained eye. His feet were positioned at precise angles, his weight distributed in a way that would allow him to move in any direction with minimal preparation. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but those who knew martial arts could see the coiled energy in his posture, like a spring compressed and ready to release. The circle of observers pressed even closer, their breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Someone had turned off the air conditioning, and the corridor began to fill with the heat of human bodies and rising tension. The only sounds were the distant echoes from the arena above and the soft shuffle of feet on concrete as people jockeyed for better viewing positions. Ali began his approach with the fluid grace that had made him famous. His footwork was poetry in motion, each step calculated and purposeful. He had spent countless hours perfecting the art of movement, learning how to generate maximum power while maintaining perfect balance and control. His left hand came up slowly, telegraphing his intentions just enough to give Jackie a fair chance to respond. What happened next would be replayed in slow motion in the minds of everyone present for the rest of their lives, as Ali's jab cut through the air with a speed and precision that had frustrated opponents for 2 decades. Jackie seemed to simply disappear. Not literally, of course, but his movement was so fluid, so unexpected, that for a moment it appeared as if he had somehow stepped outside the normal flow of time and space. Jackie's response was not what anyone expected. Instead of blocking the punch or dodging away from it, he moved toward Ali, his body flowing like water around a stone. His left hand came up not to deflect the punch, but to guide it, redirecting its force while simultaneously closing the distance between them. His right hand moved in a circular motion that seemed almost lazy in its execution, but the effect was anything but casual. In the space of 3 heartbeats, Jackie had not only avoided Ali's jab, but had positioned himself in such a way that his own counterattack was already in motion. His right hand, moving in that deceptively slow circle, was aimed directly at Ali's solar plexus, with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of training and an understanding of human anatomy that went far beyond what most fighters possessed. But here was where Jackie's true genius revealed itself. At the last possible moment, when his strike was mere inches from making contact with one of the most famous bodies in sports history, he stopped, not slowed down, not pulled back, stopped completely. His fist hung motionless in the air, close enough to Ali's chest that the heavyweight champion could feel the heat radiating from Jackie's knuckles. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to have physical weight. 20 of the toughest, most experienced fighters in the world stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Ali himself stared down at the fist that had appeared as if from nowhere, positioned with such precision that he could see the calluses on Jackie's knuckles, evidence of years spent conditioning his hands against wooden posts and iron plates. "How?" Ali whispered, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. "Did you do that?" Jackie slowly withdrew his hand, settling back into his casual stance with the same fluid grace he had displayed during the exchange. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, not one of arrogance or superiority, but of quiet satisfaction at having demonstrated something beautiful and complex to an audience capable of appreciating its subtlety. "In my country," Jackie said, his English now flowing with confidence, born of having proven himself, "we have saying, the water that wins against the rock is not the water that strikes hardest, but the water that finds the path the rock cannot defend." Ali stepped back, his eyes never leaving Jackie's face. The greatest heavyweight champion in boxing history, The man who had faced down Sonny Liston and Joe Frazier, who had stared into the eyes of George Foreman and refused to blink, was looking at this young martial artist with something approaching reverence. That wasn't fighting, Ali said slowly, his voice carrying a note of wonder. That was something else entirely. That was art. The circle of observers began to murmur among themselves, their voices filled with excitement and disbelief. These were men who had dedicated their lives to understanding combat, who could analyze the mechanics of a punch or the strategy behind a combination with scientific precision. What they had just witnessed defied their understanding of how human beings moved, how physics worked, how time and space could be manipulated through pure skill and training. One of Ali's trainers, an old-school boxing coach named Mickey, who had worked corners since the 1940s, stepped forward with shaking hands. He had seen every great fighter of his generation, had trained champions, and witnessed legends being born. But this was something entirely new to his experience. In 40 years of boxing, Mickey said, his voice hoarse with emotion, I've never seen anything like that. Kid, you didn't just avoid that punch, you made it disappear. You turned Muhammad Ali's offense into your own opportunity, and you did it so smoothly it looked like you had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Jackie shook his head modestly. No rehearsal. This is what we call Ting-Jing listening energy. You learn to feel your opponent's intention before they fully form it themselves. You learn to use their force as the beginning of your own movement. It takes many years to develop. Ali was still staring at the spot where Jackie's fist had stopped, as if he could replay the moment by concentrating hard enough. His own hand came up to touch his chest, feeling for any sign that contact had actually been made. There was nothing, of course. But the precision of Jackie's control had been so perfect that Ali's nervous system was still processing the possibility of impact. You could have hit me, Ali said, and it wasn't a question. You were close enough, fast enough, positioned perfectly. You chose not to. Yes, Jackie replied simply. Fighting is not about proving you can hurt someone. True martial arts is about proving you don't need to. The implications of this statement hung in the air, like incense in a temple. Every man in that corridor had built his career on the ability to inflict damage, to overwhelm opponents through superior technique, conditioning, and will. The idea that the highest expression of martial skill might be the ability to avoid violence entirely was revolutionary to their way of thinking. Ali began to pace, his mind working through the implications of what he had just experienced. He had built his reputation on speed, on the ability to hit opponents before they could react, on footwork that allowed him to be everywhere and nowhere at once. But Jackie had demonstrated something that went beyond speed, beyond reflexes, beyond even the lightning-fast reactions that had made Ali famous. This changes things, Ali said finally, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. This changes everything we think we know about fighting, about combat, about what the human body can do when it's trained properly. The crowd began to press closer again, sensing that this moment was far from over. Someone had produced a camera, though in those days before cell phones and social media, documenting such moments required actual film and considerable planning. The photographer, a sports journalist who had covered boxing for major magazines, began snapping pictures with the rapid-fire intensity of a machine gun. I want to try again, Ali announced suddenly, his competitive spirit overriding his amazement. I want to see if that was luck, or if you can really do that consistently. Jackie's smile widened slightly. Mr. Ali, with respect, it was not luck. But I understand your curiosity. In my training, we practice 10,000 repetitions of each technique until it becomes as natural as breathing. What you saw was the result of many years of such practice. Ali nodded, settling back into his fighting stance. This time, however, there was a different quality to his preparation. The playful curiosity was still there, but it was now mixed with genuine respect and a desire to understand, rather than simply to test. He had realized that he wasn't just facing another fighter, he was encountering an entirely different philosophy of combat. This time, Ali said, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to throw a combination jab, cross, hook. I want to see how you handle multiple attacks. The observers held their breath. A combination from Muhammad Ali, even at reduced power, represented one of the most sophisticated offensive sequences in all of combat sports. The timing, the rhythm, the way each punch set up the next. It was the product of decades of refinement and natural talent that few human beings could ever hope to match. Jackie nodded his understanding, settling once again into his deceptively casual stance. But this time, Those who were watching carefully could see subtle changes in his positioning. His feet were set slightly wider, his center of gravity lowered almost imperceptibly. His hands, still hanging loosely at his sides, seemed to vibrate with potential energy. Ali began his approach, and immediately everyone could see that this was different from his first attack. His movement was more complex, more layered, with subtle feints and timing variations designed to confuse and overwhelm. The jab came first, lightning fast and precisely aimed, followed immediately by the cross, and then the hook sweeping in from an angle that would be almost impossible to defend against using conventional boxing techniques. What followed was like watching a master calligrapher create a work of art in real time. Jackie's response was not a series of separate defensive movements, but rather a single, flowing sequence that seemed to unfold in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He moved through and around Ali's combination, like smoke passing through a screen. Each of his movements perfectly timed to coincide with the spaces between Ali's punches. But more than that, Jackie was creating opportunities even as he defended. Each evasive movement was also the beginning of a potential counterattack. Each shift in position opening up new angles and possibilities. By the time Ali's combination was complete, Jackie had moved from a position of apparent disadvantage to one where he could have struck from any of 6 different angles, using any of a dozen different techniques. And once again, he chose not to strike at all. Instead, he simply stood there, having demonstrated that he could flow through one of the most devastating offensive sequences in boxing history. Like water flowing around stones in a riverbed. The silence this time was even more profound than before. Ali stood with his hands still extended in the follow-through of his hook, staring at Jackie with an expression that mixed amazement, respect, and something that might have been envy. In all his years of fighting, he had never encountered anything remotely like what he was witnessing. "Impossible," whispered one of the other boxers, a heavyweight contender who had been training for a title shot. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody can read attacks that clearly, respond that quickly, control distance and timing with that kind of precision." Jackie turned to address the group, his demeanor still humble despite having just demonstrated abilities that bordered on the supernatural. "What you call impossible is simply the result of different training methods. In Chinese martial arts, we spend many years learning to feel energy, to understand the flow of force and intention. We practice not just with our bodies, but with our minds and spirits as well." Ali lowered his hands slowly, his chest rising and falling with the deep breaths of someone who had just experienced something profound. "You're telling me that this is teachable, that other people can learn to do what you just did, with proper instruction and many years of dedicated practice?" "Yes," Jackie replied, "but it requires a different way of thinking about combat, about the relationship between opponents, about what victory truly means." The photographer had been capturing every moment of this exchange, sensing that he was documenting something that would be talked about for decades to come. The rapid clicking of his camera provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the conversation, like a metronome, keeping time for a musical performance. Ali began to pace again, his mind clearly working through the implications of what he had experienced. "You know what this means," he said finally, addressing the entire group. "This means that everything we think we know about fighting, about what's possible in combat, is just the beginning. This young man has shown us that there are levels of skill we never even imagined." One of Ali's longtime training partners, a former light heavyweight champion named Tony, stepped forward with obvious skepticism still written across his face. "With all due respect, champ, this is one demonstration. In the ring, under pressure, with someone really trying to hurt you, that's when you find out what works and what doesn't." Jackie nodded thoughtfully. "You are right to be skeptical. What I have shown you is only the beginning of what martial arts can be. In a real fight, many other factors come into play, but the principles remain the same. Use your opponent's force against them. Move like water, strike like lightning, and always seek the path that requires the least violence to achieve victory." Ali stopped pacing and faced Jackie directly. "I want to understand this better. I want to know how you developed these abilities. What kind of training produces this level of skill? Because what I just saw, that wasn't just fighting technique, that was something approaching magic." The conversation that followed would last for nearly 2 hours, extending far beyond the time when the arena had emptied and the maintenance crews had begun cleaning up after the evening's events. Jackie spoke about his training in Hong Kong, about the masters who had taught him, about the philosophy that underpinned Chinese martial arts. He described hours spent practicing forms in empty parks before dawn, conditioning exercises that seemed designed more for monks than fighters. meditation techniques that taught practitioners to feel the flow of energy in their own bodies and in their opponents. Ali listened with the intensity of a student, asking questions that revealed both his natural intelligence and his deep understanding of combat. He wanted to know about timing, about the mental aspects of fighting, about how Jackie had learned to read intentions before they became actions. The other fighters gathered around, their initial skepticism gradually giving way to fascination as they realized they were receiving a masterclass in approaches to combat they had never even considered. The most important thing, Jackie explained as the evening wore on, is to understand that true martial arts is not about dominating your opponent. It is about achieving harmony, even in the midst of conflict. When you can move in perfect response to your opponent's actions, when you can use their aggression as the fuel for your own technique, then you have begun to understand what martial arts can really be. As the night finally wound down and the group began to disperse, Ali pulled Jackie aside for a private conversation. The arena was nearly empty now, the echoes of their voices bouncing off concrete walls and metal fixtures that had witnessed countless moments of athletic glory. "Jackie," Ali said, his voice carrying a sincerity that was reserved for his most important conversations. "What you showed me tonight, that's going to change how I think about fighting for the rest of my life. You've opened up possibilities I never knew existed." Jackie bowed slightly, the gesture carrying all the respect and humility that had been instilled in him through years of traditional training. "Mr. Ali, you honor me with your words. But remember, what I have shown you is not about being better than others. It is about being better than you were yesterday, about constantly growing and learning and becoming more than you thought possible." The two men shook hands, and in that moment, something passed between them that went beyond mere respect between athletes. It was a recognition of shared dedication, of the understanding that true mastery in any discipline requires not just physical skill, but wisdom, character, and an endless commitment to improvement. As they walked toward the exit, Ali turned back one more time to look at the corridor where the demonstration had taken place. "You know what the most amazing thing about tonight was?" he said. "It wasn't just that you could do what you did. It was that you chose to do it with such control, such respect for your opponent. That takes a different kind of strength than anything I've ever encountered." Jackie smiled, the expression lighting up his entire face. "That is the true lesson, Mr. Ali. Anyone can learn to fight, but learning when not to fight, learning how to win without destroying your opponent, that is the real art." The impact of that evening in Madison Square Garden would ripple through both men's lives and careers in ways neither could have anticipated. For Ali, it opened up new ways of thinking about movement, timing, and the mental aspects of combat that would influence his training and philosophy for years to come. For Jackie, it provided validation from one of the world's most respected athletes that his approach to martial arts had value beyond entertainment and movie stunts. But perhaps most importantly, that 3-second exchange in a dimly lit corridor demonstrated something profound about human potential. It showed that with dedication, proper training, and the right mindset, individuals could transcend the apparent limitations of physics and human capability. It proved that mastery in any discipline is not about dominating others, but about achieving such complete understanding and control that violence becomes unnecessary. The lessons from that night extend far beyond martial arts or boxing. They speak to the power of approaching challenges with humility and respect, of using an opponent's strength as the foundation for your own response, of understanding that true victory comes not from defeating others but from mastering yourself, in a world that often celebrates aggression and domination. Jackie Chan's demonstration offered a different model, one where skill, wisdom, and restraint combined to create something far more powerful than brute force alone. Years later, both men would speak about that evening as a turning point in their understanding of what human beings are capable of achieving. It became a story that was told and retold, growing in significance with each telling, inspiring countless others to pursue their own paths of mastery and self-improvement. And at its heart, it remained a testament to the idea that the greatest victories are often the ones where nobody gets hurt, where respect is maintained, and where both participants walk away having learned something valuable about themselves and each other.